So welcome to our June CTT in Action session. All of this work is based around transformation, and the two sessions we've had so far, the first one and the second one, were really about stories of transformation. And this one is going to be much more about your use of the tools, so helping you to understand aspects of the tools that are maybe less understood or less known. And we wanted to highlight that. So for CTT in Action for the future, there's sometimes it's going to be stories and case studies. Sometimes it will be practical use of the tools and other topics that that are emerging, and we're already getting requests.
And for that purpose, we have invited Alan and Catherine, as you can see on the screen, hopefully.
Hi.
And to give their stories or give their perspective on how you best use the tools that we are going to look at. We are going to do it and work with it 2 by 2. So we're going to work with the Business Needs Scorecard and dig into that. And then we're going to look at the Culture Evolution report as well. And we're going to have it separate. And the reason for that is we would like to be able to divide it up and treat it differently afterwards in terms of recording as well.
So we're going to follow the format we've had before. If you want to ask questions, you'll see there's a Q&A box near the bottom, and you are very welcome to post your questions in there. We will mediate and moderate the questions, and we'll ask Catherine and Alan as we go along, or we may answer them ourselves. And there's also a chat box where you can chat to us, or you can chat to each other, and you can just post general comments or observations in the chat box as well. So feel free to either use the question area or the chat area. We'll be looking after that and monitoring that as we go along.
And since we have 1 hour as a whole, and if we don't have time to address all the questions that you post, we always come back with answering those questions in writing afterwards, or have a conversation with you afterwards if that is the case. So don't feel that your question has not been heard.
Yeah. And for all those that are not here that have registered, I guess you can't hear me at the moment, but you will do when there's then we'll be posting this recording because we know a lot of people register even though they're not in the right time zone to be able to listen, and we want to look after you all. And this is valuable information we'll be sharing here, so we'll make sure that this gets shared. So I think, is there anything else, Tor?
No, I'm happy to see that we are almost 60 persons now live here, and I think that we are ready to go.
So I think Catherine is going to kick off with the Business Needs Scorecard. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine, and we'll be quiet, and we'll just be monitoring the questions in the chat and looking after you in the background.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm just going to get to my first. If I can get to my first slide, would help. There we go. So for some of you, you'll be very familiar with this and you'll have covered it on your training, but we find when we're talking to people that sometimes people get so drawn into the dot plot and all the words in there that they often forget there are other indices and other aspects of the results that we produce for you that may give you insights that maybe sometimes get overlooked, and that's the purpose of having this chat today. So just for those who don't know, the Business Needs Scorecard was something that Richard developed, and he built on the back of the Kaplan and Norton Balance Scorecard that probably a lot of you are familiar with, and a lot of businesses certainly maybe still use but did use in the past. So it's something that's very familiar in the business world. And in that Balance Scorecard, there were 4 particular aspects, which were learning and growth, which Richard called evolution; process, which we name fitness; financial, which is finance; and customer, which is external stakeholder relations, because we also cover suppliers and other stakeholders in that section. And from when Richard was looking at the whole piece of work, he became clear to him that there were maybe 2 aspects that were missing from this. One of those was societal contribution, so how an organisation is giving back to society in general, and also then focusing more on the culture, the and that tends to be the internal culture. You might think that all of these things are culture, and they are all part of it, but we were specific in terms of looking at internal culture. And then, so at first there were just the 6 segments, and then more recently, I'm trying to think how long ago, maybe 4, 5 years ago, we did some more work trying to, because culture was such a big, I'm going to call it a bucket, such a big section, and there were so many different values in there, that it became clear to us that it would be really helpful to be able to put some other headings that sit below that to try and give guidance as to what are the sort of things that people are seeing, or what are the sort of requests that people are asking for. And so, having looked at all the values that we felt fitted into the category of culture, it became clear there were 3 distinct categories, which we call trust and engagement, direction, communication, and supportive environment. So I'm going to go a little bit more detail about what those are. So you'll see here under each category, in bold, there's some examples of the values that you might find that sit in each particular category. And then there's below that a definition of how we decide, if you like, or how it's decided, what are the values that sit in that category. So for example, external stakeholder relations, it says there the values and behaviours that impact on the relationship with the customer, market, suppliers, and then any other strategic partners. So any values in respect of that would fall into that category, and so they're categorised accordingly. And so you'll see there's lots of different definitions, and there is an example in my CTT, if it was ever helpful to you, of all of those different categories and what the definitions are, just in case that gives you a bit more background. So you'll see there some examples of the different values. So under trust and engagement, empowerment and teamwork, and supportive environment in culture, balance, homework, respect. So there's no, it's not, you know, there's no smoke and mirrors with this. It's fairly straightforward, but when it comes to looking at the results, you'll find that these categories can sometimes be quite helpful. So I'm going to move on now to some other things that hopefully were covered in your training, but again, these are things that when you've got so much information presented to you when you first do your training, I know you can, you know, it can be a bit overwhelming and you can sometimes lose sight of and forget these things. So when you're seeing values in the top half of the BNS categories of fitness, finance and external stakeholder relationships, the top left on my diagram here, they're the tangible classic measures. So traditionally, a business would focus on its performance, how well people are performing, its numbers, the profit it's making, its turnover, and also maybe get indications from customers of how satisfied they were. So they're the more tangible classic measures. Moving to the top right, we call this the intangibles, because they're the things that are really tricky to measure, or have been traditionally tricky to measure. So how much an organisation is looking at evolving and trying to move forward, how much it's giving back to society, and then obviously the aspect of the culture, which we in the BNS we're talking about the internal culture of the organisation. So if you're seeing lots of dots in the bottom half of a dot plot, then you know that this organisation is very focused on the more intangible aspects of the business. And then we can split them 2 other ways. So you'll see in this bottom left area where it says the people aspects, so external stakeholder relations, culture, societal contribution, they're all things that are linked to how the organisation interacts with people, not only its internal people, but also those externally, both customers and greater society. Again, so if you're seeing a spread of dots in that section, then you know it's very people focused. And the final one, the left-hand side, the capacity to deliver. So evolution, fitness and finance tend to be linked to how much an organisation is focused on its products and services. So that includes the development of its products and services, how well it's actually producing those, and, you know, in terms of the money side, what income they're bringing to the organisation. So these are other patterns that you can use to spot within when looking at the BNS scorecard to try and say, okay, where is my organisation focused? Or from a desired culture perspective, where is it they want to focus more? So that they can be very helpful. Okay, so I'm just going to go to a real example here just to give you an indication of when perhaps a BNS might be useful. So if you look in this organisation, looking at the current and the desired culture values, if you're looking at it from a pattern perspective, the distribution of values on the dot plot, you'll see that the pattern is very largely the same. So while some of the values are different, because you can see we've got on the desired culture some of these black and the blue values are the new requests, so they are different. Overall, they're fitting in to the same similar categories to those that people are already experiencing. So when you're looking for, okay, what aspect of the culture here might people be looking to develop further, it's maybe less clear. However, you can look at some of the other indices and you can see that from an IROS perspective, they want more focus on organisational needs, because we've got six values here in the organisational perspective desired and only 3 over here, plus 1 potential limiting. And also you can look at the values, so you've got employee engagement, accountability, coaching, mentoring, the new values that are coming up, and say, okay, what's the themes here? What is it that people are asking for? Having employee engagement, employee recognition, coaching and mentoring, you might think, okay, this is all about people, so it's about focus on the people within the organisation. So you are able to see quite a lot from this. So now I want to move to the BNS and just to see what additional information we might glean from looking at that. Okay, so here, looking at what I talked about before, if you look at the top current culture values plot, most of the dots, apart from this 1 potential limiting value of bureaucracy, are all in the bottom half of the pie chart. So we know that this organisation is very focused on the more intangible aspects of its business. And so that's something that maybe is unusual to see. Maybe it's very usual more in charity, that sort of thing. In a commercial organisation, traditionally, we're more used to seeing fitness, finance, external stakeholder relations, and that's where we would normally see most of the dots. Moving forward in the desired culture, actually, people want much the same. They're not asking for more focus on the more tangible metrics, which may mean that for this organisation, that's covered. You know, it's something that's already taken care of, and we don't need to worry about it. However, as you all know, it may be that it's a gap for this organisation and it's not focusing on its performance, its finance, or its customers or stakeholders. So that will be a question maybe that this would raise for you in terms of talking to your client. One other thing that Phil.
Catherine, I've got, we're going to save questions to the end, but I do have a contextual question from Tony that might help people to connect to this. Do you know what type of organization this is? We can't divulge the name of the organization, but what type of organization or industry?
I don't, but Alan might do.
I do. It is a government organization.
Okay, great.
So
that's
helpful.
Non-profit.
Okay,
thank you.
And so one other thing, actually, I should have said maybe from the beginning, in terms of why this might also be useful for you, is that particularly initially when you're starting to work with a client and talking about the 7 levels, sometimes that conceptually is quite difficult for them to get, to understand, and it takes some interpretation, and you know, some people will get it and other people might struggle a little bit with it. However, the BNS, because of the link to Kaplan and Norton's balance scorecard, is something that business leaders particularly will be able to latch onto much more easily. And maybe for some people, I know this is an easier way in to start to look at this, and then they start to understand this more and then relate back to the 7 levels. And there isn't a right or a wrong way to do it. I'm just giving that as another suggestion as to how this can be useful. Okay, so now looking at from the current to the desired, looking at, okay, what's different in terms of the spread of the dots, because we said originally in the dot plot there wasn't a lot of difference, and similarly here there isn't an awful lot of difference. However, we can see in this area here of trust engagement, we did have 2 dots which were teamwork and conflict resolution in the current culture, and now we've got teamwork again, but new values of employee engagement, accountability, and cross-group collaboration. So there's certainly a message there around people wanting to work more together or to be more involved. So that's something that now we're able to look at this trust and engagement message and say, okay, what's that about? And it gives us a bit more of a clue as to what we might want to focus on or what the organisation wants to focus on. Similarly, you can see there's one extra dot in evolution, so only one extra dot, and it's just coaching and mentoring. The other two are the same, but there may be something there. So you can get a lot of messages from this, but we've also introduced a new, well, it's not that new now, but again, it was a few years ago, but maybe new to some people, looking at all the values. So a bit like we do with the 7 levels, and we plot all the values, all the votes for all the values, and give you a percentage against each level. We do that against each area here. And so you will see here the current culture values is this green bar, and it gives you the percentage of votes for the current culture. And then underneath it, you can see shown in red the entropy at that particular level. So if I look at this area of fitness, 8% of the votes for values in the current culture were in the area of fitness, but 5% were things that were maybe getting in the way. And you'll see that we show the potential limiting values right in the bottom of the table, so you can see what might be impeding the organisation in terms of its focus on that particular area. So it's quite useful because you've got everything here. The orange bar is the desired values, and the clear thing that I always focus on here when I'm looking at it is what's the shift from this green bar, current culture, to the orange bar. So where's the biggest jump, where's the biggest shift in focus? And here it's very clear, it's in this area of evolution. So if you remember, I'll go back to the previous slide here. There was one extra dot in evolution, which was coaching and mentoring. And I move over here, actually, there's a lot more to it than that maybe is below the surface that we don't see just looking at the dot plot. So if we now look here on this table below, you will see, as well as the values, the desired culture values of continuous improvement, coaching, learning, continuous learning, coaching, mentoring, you'll see that there were some values jumps also associated with the area of evolution. And they were adaptability, innovation, and leadership development. So now, and I'm looking at these words, I can start to see maybe some more patterns. Evolution tends to fall into one of two categories. It can either be about we want more focus on the development of our products and services, on processes, or we want more development of people. Here, I would say actually they want a bit of both, because we've got continuous improvement as well as adaptability and innovation. And then on the other side, we've got continuous learning, coaching, mentoring, and leadership development. So there's more of it. So rather than just looking at this new value of coaching, mentoring that appears, there's a bit more to it than that. And we can see here that actually we do want more focus on both development of people and processes. And then below that, looking at what might be getting in the way currently of this development that people are asking for, you will see in the table underneath caution and short-term focus. So there's a question to ask around, is there something that we are not seeing, we're not looking forward enough, we're being too reticent in our approach that's holding back the development of the organisation. Similarly, I'm just going to show you one more, and you can see for yourself there are some others. Trust and engagement, which was the area with the biggest focus, actually it's only a 4% increase. However, if you're looking at the jumps that are associated also with this level, it gives you more of a picture, because people are wanting employee fulfillment and empowerment alongside engagement, accountability, teamwork, cross-group collaboration. Again, so the message here, I think it just reinforces it really. It's about people wanting to feel more involved, more connected with one another. And again, at the bottom, you can see the messages that are getting in the way. The things that might be getting in the way: silo mentality, control. So I know I've maybe breezed through that quite quickly, but they are the key things that I wanted to show you, just to see that there are other things and other themes that may be apparent if you're looking at the BNS alongside the normal dot plot. So I think I'm ready now for any questions. So I'm going to move to here.
Yeah, we have got 3 questions, I think, and try to place your questions in the Q&A folder. I see that some of you are also putting in this chat box, and we are trying to cover both of those.
Okay.
I'm going to start reading, and I think we are able to cover the 3-4 questions that we have.
Okay.
In the BNS circle, would you say that that you read the needs by where there are no or few dots? That's Gail Van Gils asking that question.
The needs by, so I guess I don't know if you're talking about desired or current culture, but in either aspect really, if there are no dots appearing or few dots, well, let's say if there's no dots, it's a bit like a gap in a level. It's exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. It may be that it's covered, and it's just something that, you know, customer service is something that we just do so well, and we're so good at it that when we're asked to think about the culture, it doesn't even register because it's already covered. So it doesn't get a mention, and we get nothing in external stakeholder. It can be that it's a gap or even a blind spot for the organisation. So if you see a gap, I would be very tempted to ask the question, you know, to what degree do you think this is already covered, or, you know, what do you feel you're already doing in the area of customers, you know, looking after your customers, because there's nothing here, for example, and then they may be able to reel off a lot of things. So I don't know if that answers the question, Torgy or Phil. Oh, Phil, you want to add something?
I would say you also get a clue by some of the other values that are there. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a lot of values such as blame, manipulation, hierarchy, greed, corruption, those sort of things, and there's a missing section in society or external stakeholder relations, you can be pretty sure that this is something that's missing rather than something that's taken care of. It's not a guarantee, but you do get a steer to that. I see Alan nodding. Have you got an extra thought on that, Alan?
No, you're doing very well, Phil.
Okay.
The only other thing I would add to that is, if in this case that Phil alluded to, where there's a lot of blame, manipulation and all of those things, trying to get the organisation to then focus on its societal contribution is probably not the next step. You know, because there's a gap there, it's probably that organisation is not ready for that. They have to sort out their own stuff first before they can start to give back to society. Obviously, customers are a bit higher up. Well, they're a lot higher up the pecking order, because you need to have customers, else you've got no business. So they need to be taken care of. But in terms of societal contribution, you've got to make sure that the organisation is ready for that. So, you know, don't lose sight of that as well.
Good. So Gail has responded, thank you. That is the way I approach it. I use the BNS a lot. However, the word needs is a little misleading. I think the jumps do show needs and the white circles. So I think she's responding to the word needs in Business Needs Scorecard.
Right. Okay.
So that's, that's a good point.
Okay. We need to press on if we should cover some other questions.
Yes.
Phil?
So from Martin, how can the BNS model be used as a first conversation with the client to identify pre and post engagement strategy? I know, Tor, that you talked something about this in our first webinar.
Yeah. What I do, and that is something that I don't display, I have it more in my head, but I kind of interview the client in the first meetings, thinking about the 6 different dimensions, and explore with them to understand their focus and their consciousness in each of these 6 different dimensions. And then I make notes of that. And what I then do is that I kind of summarize my meeting and display it in the BNS and have a conversation with them at that point, so to speak, where they can see, we had a lot of focus, or we have a good situation here, but we don't have any focus on this area. And that sparks and helps me sparks the conversation for me to understand where they are and for them to see themselves as well. So that is one kind of a pre-engagement strategy, you could say. The other way I would say is that I've used it to highlight the strategy that we have in an organization, the one that you have written up, what are the focus areas, and display that into the BNS. And thereby you would see, does the values that has been selected actually reflect the strategy that we have? And then you can see there if there's, we have a lot of values in all areas but the evolution, but we have a very much of an innovation strategy. Well, then you can always ask yourself, is that's something for us to explore. So you show the gap between strategy and the values chosen to describe who we are and how we would like it to be.
Good.
So those are two ways.
So I've got another question here for either Catherine or Alan. Are there any values in the culture chart that do not fit in the BNS? I heard that not all are transposable.
Right. So when the BNS was first developed, it's true, not all of the values were put into the BNS because it was felt that some values actually fitted in more than one category, and so they weren't included at all. I think an example of that was honesty. You can be honest with the outside world, honest with your clients, or honest internally, and so honesty didn't used to figure at all in the BNS. The problem with that was when there were gaps or things that weren't always apparent, you then didn't know whether it was because it was a value that wasn't actually part of the BNS or it was a gap. And so we took the decision to try and work with the values and to try and see if they would all fit. And that's where we came up with those categories, because culture just as a broad bucket didn't really work. But when we split them into the trust, engagement, direction, communication, and supportive environment, some then became very apparent that where they did fit. So for example, honesty, the one I mentioned, is direction and communication. It's how you're being guided and how you're talking with one another is all about, honesty is very key to that. And so now every single value fits in a category, just like every single value sits in a level or has an IROS indicator. They all now have a BNS category.
Yeah. We're going to have to move on soon, but Luke is requesting that when we're talking about something, we go back to the slide that relates to that. So let's just bear that in mind as we're asking questions in the future. So thank you for that request, Luke. We'll look after that as we go on. Let's do, we've answered that one. So from Dharmesh, you mentioned that one can actually start a conversation with a BNS opposed to the 7 levels. Will doing so take away anything when discussing the 7 levels, or is there any experience of the 7 levels getting sidelined by the BNS? What's your experience?
I think I can give an answer from working with clients in that respect. I think, as Catherine was saying, it's a good segue to come in and talk about how we actually use the values. It doesn't take away the attention, it actually gives you a starting point. But now from a business perspective, which is a dimension that many of them that you talk to are used to talking about, then you say, okay, let's look upon this now from a cultural perspective, and then you introduce them into the 7 levels, which gives you a cultural dimension. So I find it more of a very good way to initiate the conversation rather than to have people shy away from it's too complicated, I don't know about the 7 levels, and there's a hurdle for them to get into it. This is a good starting point if I feel that they are very much of having a business focus, and then invite them into the cultural focus.
Okay. One final thing, thank you, Tor. One final thing from Rick is, do you refer to employee engagement as an action, as in engaging employees regularly, or do you refer to it as their engagement state?
Is that like how you would define it? Because one of the things that we're very careful about is not actually defining the value in terms of, so it fits clearly into trusted engagement. I mean, it almost has it's got that in the title. But what that means to a client, I would only know by asking the client. So if employee engagement is coming up, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I would be asking them, why do you think that's there? What does that mean to you? And how does that relate to your organization? Because different people can interpret values differently, and so it's important to use it as a dialogue, really, as a way to get into the dialogue, to ask them more about their engagement.
Yeah,
Is that answering the question?
we'll see. Thanks for Rick said, thanks for clarifying, Catherine.
Okay.
I think that what Catherine's just said is a fundamental principle of the work, that we don't define the values. We ask the question, and whatever values come up are a start point for dialogue, not a set truth. They're not the answer. Let's talk about what that means. So I'm noticing the time, and I'm going to say there may be a couple of other questions, but we're going to move on now, and we're going to ask Alan to pick up on the next part. And if there are any unanswered questions by the end of the session, we promise to get back to you personally.
Just a small remark that we forgot to say initially while Ellen is getting her presentation ready, is that you will notice that we are actually looking a little different in the way on how we display ourselves, so to speak. We are having a new brand, which many of you are aware of, but so we're trying to display with a new look of how our reports and how we present ourselves, as you can see here up on the left top corner. So anyway, that was more of we hope that is making a lot of sense to you, and please visit our new website as well. It's a good source for more information.
So Marina said, I like the new brand, great work, and I've seen a couple of other comments of people who are responding positively to that, so thank you.